Okay, it says we're live. Hey everybody, let me just move a couple things around here to make sure I can see everything that's going on. Good, got the chat there. This looks good. We're not dropping any frames. Perfect, okay. So I assume that everything is okay. Check, check. Audio, check. Banana. All right. So I've got a couple things I want to say here for people that are watching this after the fact. But it looks like we are in action. Okay, so yeah, we're doing this live right now. If you're watching this video after the fact because it showed up in your feed and you're like, why is this guy staring off and rambling? So this is a live stream, but I've got a couple notes I want to hit at the beginning to make this easier for everybody. So, and you guys can share this if people join the stream afterwards, you know, moderators or whoever else, point them in certain directions. So in the description to this video, there's a few links already. There's a link for samples that we'll be talking about during this video, and then also 2 links to the previous videos. That's for people that are watching this after the fact. If I reference stuff we talked about before, you can use those links. One is on sort of log correcting mistakes, which is the most recent one, which this video is going to be addressing more directly. And then the previous one is where I did like color matching and color correcting with like hue curves and saturation curves and that kind of thing. Both are good to watch if you want to learn more. Okay, then, yeah, samples in the description. They're all TIFF files. I didn't include video footage because I shoot a lot of my stuff in like RAW and DNX and they're massive files. So what I did is in Resolve, I exported high bit depth TIFF exports from Resolve and then put them on a Google Drive link so you can download the TIFF files, which are big on their own, but they should give you the same result if you want to play around with these and, you know, make your own little log grades. They should still work when doing them with TIFF files. I know TIFF works in Resolve. I don't know if it works. You want to work on your exhaust pipe out there, buddy? I know that TIFF works in Resolve. I'm not sure if it works in Final Cut or Premiere, which brings me to my next point, which is that if there's anybody that's like really good at Premiere color grading or really good at Final Cut color grading and you want to provide translations to some of the things that I'm saying of how that would work, I'd love to see that in the comments or in the chat, letting people know, you know, the relevant name of a tool or something like that. I'm going to do things on Resolve in this, but don't be discouraged. A lot of the stuff that we're going to do in Resolve is going to be available in other programs, and I'm also going to try and provide some solutions for basically just any NLE that you're working with. But that being said, I do highly recommend using Resolve for this kind of work. It's definitely better, provides better results, better tuned, all that. I'm not sponsored by Blackmagic. I don't have any reason to say that. I switched and it was the same kind of difficult slog as it would be for anybody else trying to like convert their workflow, but I'm glad that I did because it's made my life easier in the long run. And the editing on it is pretty good now too. That was the thing. I was like, I like the color, but I don't know about the editing. Once you get used to the editing, it's really fast and optimizes your hardware well. Cool. Yep. Okay. So now the actual stuff that I want to show you. I've got a couple of those things written down too, so I don't forget. Okay, I'm just going to say hello to everybody in the chat, and then we'll jump right into it. Hello to everybody. Thank you all for joining the live stream here. I've got a super chat here from Pebmets. Phil, hey Gerald, thank you for this live stream. This is something I'm very interested in. Perfect. The only thing that is going to be somewhat limiting in this video, but I'm happy to see if, you know, we can make it work somehow, is that it's difficult to provide like tons of different possible shooting scenarios. So I'm going to try and talk super broad, but also use cases of how you could apply this on set when you're not, you know, filming charts and in perfect white balanced environments, whatever. So we'll talk about some of the fundamentals, but then we'll talk about how you can do this on set easily, because that was one of the biggest questions. So don't be alarmed. The samples are just charts, and we're going to be talking about charts. A lot of the questions I got asked was like, should I buy a $1,300 chart or whatever just to do this? No. And in those previous videos, I've also done it with just a Passport video color checker from X-Rite. But those can be too expensive for some budgets as well. So if you have the money to get a good chart, get it and makes your life easier. If you don't, get yourself just like an 18% gray card on Amazon for like $10 or whatever. But you will need some kind of, you know, tool, if you will, to give you a baseline for exposure. Outside of that, we could say skin tone, but skin tones vary as well, so it can be kind of difficult. Anyway, we're going to try to apply some practical aspects to this. Anyway, thank you for your generosity, Phil. As far as super chats, guys, you don't need to worry about it so much for this video because I don't know that I'm going to be that in tune with the chat, but I'm going to try my best, and I've got my moderators here letting me know when there are super chats. But I don't want you to drop a super chat and then it gets ignored and then, you know, you're disappointed or whatever. But I will try my best to keep up with it. But this is free content for people to learn from. Okay, so I've got a setup here. So if I press 2 on my ATEM Mini, it should bring up Resolve. And if I press on here, it should show my stupid face over there in Resolve. Hi. Okay, so let's go over what we're working with here. I'm assuming, I didn't like thoroughly check the chat, but I'm assuming that nobody's saying we can't hear you or whatever, right? Okay. Your black magic is flickering. What does that even mean? My ATEM? Were you talking about this thing? Yeah. That's just a whole LED thing. Not relevant. Let's stick to the content, guys. Okay. So, S-Log versus HLG differences. We're definitely going to get into that. Okay. All right, so we got Resolve open here. These are the samples that I put in that folder that you can get in the description. The first 3 are S-Log2. But again, this is any log you can apply these ideas to. So we got S-Log2. I did some overexposure. So this is 0 EV is what it says in the description. That means that it's exposed by the book, the way the manufacturer wants, which in this case is 32%, I believe, middle gray, which means that your middle gray, which if you had an 18% gray card, just the gray card, you would want that to show up with 32% zebras, let's say, or 32% on the waveform. And then you would get an exposure like this. And then we did 1 stop over that and 2 stops over that. And they're marked as +1 EV and +2 EV in the folder. Then we've got S-Log3, which is exposed to 41%. So your 18% gray card. Make sure that's nothing to do with the live stream. It's probably just YouTube telling me I'm live. Yep. Your 18% gray card should have 41% zebras or 41% on the waveform. You get an exposure like this. This is by the book. And then we got 1 stop over that and 2 stops over that. And then we've got HLG. Now this is supposed to be exposed by the book. It might be 1/3 of a stop under. I called it 0 EV, but it might be just a hair underexposed. And then we've got 1 stop over that. And then we've got just sort of a Rec 709 full contrast. I think I've got a hair on me. A Rec 709 full contrast one here to give us sort of an idea of what, I guess, like what an end result would be when transformed. And that's kind of what we're going to try to get to. Some of the questions I got asked in the previous video was, how do you get this X to show up? This is not a setting that you turn on in your waveform. This X is created by this 11-step grayscale on the chart. So you'd actually need to have a chart with that to see the X. I only did this for demonstrative purposes. In the previous video, I think some people thought I was saying you got to buy this chart in order to grade log. You don't. I'm using this chart. It does make your life easier. If you want to make like your own LUTs and stuff like that, this chart would be like if it's a business for you, this is a good investment for that LUT making business. But if you, it sounds like the laptop might be picking up noise. I'm trying to do all this on one laptop for fun too. So I'm streaming right out of here. I have Resolve open, color grading in here. I'm doing the ATEM Mini management and stuff. So we'll see how this laptop handles. Anyway. The chart is a good investment if you plan on making LUTs, but you don't need to spend this money on a chart just to grade log. And that's kind of something, I use the chart to demonstrate the problems in the previous video, but I'm going to show you how to solve the problems. We're going to use the chart to see how they've been solved, but you don't need the chart in order to do this. Hopefully that makes sense. And also there was a question regarding the X of why the one side is higher than the other side. And that just has to do with I didn't light the chart perfectly even. There's a little bit of a brighter, the light's hitting it a little bit more on the right side than the left side, so this white chip is just coming up a little bit. If I lit it perfectly dead on and it was done correctly, it should be exactly the same on both sides because both of those white chips are the same intensity. Cool? Let me just check the chat, make sure everybody's good up to this point. Exactly, Aaron said the same thing. Streaming in OBS from the laptop while color grading is a good demo. I see a super chat here, so I'll just read it real quick. Thank you for doing this, Gerald. Any chance you could touch on grading a raw image such as from Red? So grading a raw image isn't actually that much different because generally first you have to choose the way that you're going to present the raw image. I don't have a raw file in here, but let's say that we did this over in Resolve. You would choose this and say we had Blackmagic Raw in here. You would have to choose how you're going to decode the raw. So if you chose log, then you would apply the same log grading principles. If you chose like a Rec 709 decoding, well then you wouldn't. It would already be done. There's no raw picture profile, if that makes sense. You always have to put it into a different picture profile in order to develop your raw, and then you grade that picture profile the same way you would if you had shot in that picture profile from the get-go. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so let's start off with a couple things. In the previous video, I was talking a lot about how just adding contrast doesn't correct the image correctly, which is why you should be weary of it, especially when it comes to luminance values. And what I did is I showed you the waveform here in the bottom right hand corner and the way the X is positioned, and then I showed you like a Rec. 709 image here and said that if we take this image and we just add contrast, that we can't make the X, and obviously this is a terrible demonstration of contrast, but let's actually let's try to do it a little bit nicer. Okay. So I was trying to demonstrate that adding contrast does not make your image look like the Rec. 709 image. It kind of looks like an X, I guess, but it's not right. Now with that though, there was other people that chimed in on different ways you could achieve a more sort of like linear expansion of your log image. And I didn't cover those because I didn't think that they were available in Premiere and stuff, so I tried to choose the things that would be more obvious across all the different NLEs. But I would like to demonstrate those things for people that are interested in it because they were fair points. The first one is that, let me reset this one, is that Resolve allows you to change the way that your contrast is applied. So typically it's an S-curve, which is why if you jack this up, you'll see that near the top, it starts to sort of curve away, and at the bottom we can't really see it because it's pushed really down. But it's a classic S-curve, which would be the same idea, and the pivot would be your sort of pivoting point of that. So if we demonstrate this on the curve, it would be like this. You would have, sort of like an S-curve, and your pivot would be adjusting sort of how deep and how high you're plunging the curve. That's if you have it set up like an S-curve. Let me reset that. Now, if you go into File, Project Settings, I think it is, and then General Options, somewhere in here, yeah, use S-curve for contrast as an option. If we disable that, and now we hit save, now if we apply contrast, it doesn't do an S-curve. You see how it stays kind of straight all along? So what we could do is a combination between offset and contrast. We could kind of get ourselves there a little bit. But without this X chart, it's going to be very difficult to know if you're doing the right combination of it, which is again why I don't recommend this approach, but I will demonstrate it. So if we increase the offset, we can move the entire X up. And let's say we stick that, by the way, your middle gray for finished image should be somewhere around 45%. I usually say bring it just below the midline because, again, it's hard to know exactly where 45% is depending on the NLE that you're using. But just below the midline, so somewhere between 43 to 47 is sort of like where you want to be. So if we look at this waveform here, 512 on a 10-bit scale is halfway because there's 1,024 values in 10-bit. Halfway between that is 512. If you're using an 8-bit scale, it goes from 0 to 255. There's 256 values. So you're going to shoot at that 128 marker, just a little bit below that. So we have our middle gray just a little bit below halfway. Now let's expand our contrast with that S-curve turned off so it shouldn't sort of curve out the edges on us. And we can get a little bit of a better one. Let's compare this to Rec. 709. Actually, Rec. 709 has even more contrast. So finesse it just a little bit, but something like that. And yes, you do get a closer result. It's not going to be perfect because we're doing this manually, but it is a closer result. So to the people who asked, yes, I was using the S-curve contrast. Yes, turning that off does make it easier, but in Premiere, the default contrast slider is an S-curve contrast slider because generally they think that's what you're going for anywhere. You want a nice S-curve in your contrast, so that's the default in most NLEs. But good call. There were some other mentions, and there's also some other ways to do this too. So let's go back in. I'm going to put that contrast back to S-curve because I like to keep it as close to Premiere as possible for the contrast so that I can duplicate and replicate things if I want. But let's talk about just adjusting your sort of limits on the curve. This is another way you could do it linearly. If you drag this top point on a curve and you pull it in, photographers will know about this, you can pull it in a linear fashion up. It doesn't curve off weird on you. And then you can do the same thing on the bottom. And that's another way to sort of fill out your histogram, if this was photography, is by just limiting this line. And then if you wanted, you could even make a little S-curve inside of here, like that. But that is another method, and that method also works. But again, how do you know how far and what to do with that if you don't have one of these X charts? Because this is only good, again, if you're making LUTs yourself. Then the last method, which I don't think a lot of people really use this one, is that you can right-click on the node. So let me show you what happens if we apply gain. Gain is generally not used. Well, you can use it on log, but there's actually log controls over here, which have highlight, midtone, and shadow controls, which do operate in a bit more sort of like straightforward fashion. But the gain control, you can see as we increase it, the gain, gamma, and lift sort of share ranges, so it's not as like precise as separating things, and it can operate in sort of a non-linear way because of the fact that it shares ranges. So maybe you're increasing your midtone values now because your mids are higher than you want them to be, so they're actually considered highlights, so they're getting pulled up. So you have to deal with that, and usually end up sort of finessing, like I'll put my lift down, I'll adjust my gamma and gain, and then eventually you go, oh, that's good, right? And then we look at Rec 709 and we go, no, ours is more curved. So it works, but there's a little trick you can do, which is instead of doing that, if you right-click on the node itself and choose, where is it here, gamma, you can change the gamma to linear. And again, I don't recommend this for a lot of applications, but now if we apply gain, you can see that it doesn't do what it did before. It just kind of, jumped on me there. It just kind of scales it up a lot more linearly because we changed, and look what happens to if we lower the lift and stuff. I'm trying to do like small increments here, but I never liked these using a mouse on those toggles there. So take a look at this waveform, and now watch what happens when I change it back from linear to just the timeline gamma. It's crazy to whack. So that gives you an idea of how it's another method to sort of like linearly scale up your log image. But again, so I think I covered all those. I want to make sure those were a lot of the questions that were asked. Just broke my pencil lid. That's what she said. I don't know what that means. Curve sliding, S-curve, making the nodes linear. Okay. But now let's talk about actually, one-step processes that don't require you to finesse things and require a chart. Again, the only reason why I was doing this whole chart thing was to demonstrate the, inadequacies and different techniques for doing it, because none of these methods we just approached even deal with the color primaries or the correct saturation or the color space. And that's the other thing. You'll notice in those samples I gave you, I mentioned both the gamma, which I said S-log, S3, and HLG, but also the gamut, the color space that we're in, so to speak. So with the S-log 2 files, I'm using S-gamut 3 Cine. I'm also doing that for S-log 3. I like S-gamut 3 Cine better for my taste, but I think the default S-log 2 on Sony cameras is S-log 2, S-gamut 2, whatever. It's not S-gamut 3 Cine is the point. Okay, just making sure that... Perfect. Okay, so moving right along. The color has to be adapted or converted or transformed as well. Now, there's a bunch of ways to go about this. Some of them you can do, I think, probably more exclusively to Resolve, and some you can do everywhere. And I'm going to show you both of those. So first off, we talked about LUTs, and I said get the LUT from the manufacturer. And a lot of people were saying, I don't know how to get the LUT from the manufacturer. So let's see if I can show you how to do that. This is LUT calc. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go and type in Sony official LUTs. I don't know. So LUT library, I think that's actually the one. I'm just going to show you a demonstration of how to get the LUTs. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but this is a way that you can do it in Premiere or whatever, because you're getting it off the internet. So if you come down here, actually click on Sony LUTs, and then download Sony Look profiles, and get out of here with the cookie policy, whatever. So there's a summary here that you can check out, and if you want, it explains how there's like 4 looks that come in the package. There's 4 looks that come in the package, and they explain what the different ones are. And then and then you have the cube files down here. So S-gamut for S-log 2, S-gamut 3 Cine for S-log 3. So because I shot an S-gamut 3 Cine for S-log 2, I probably couldn't really use these. But if you shoot according to the manufacturer's guide, so for these you'd have to shoot at 32%, shoot an S-log 2, and shoot an S-gamut, and then you could download these cube files from here, and the one that's LC709A is probably the most popular one, and then you just drop that on your footage. I might still have those in Resolve, so let me just do a quick check. I do. So S-log 2, S-gamut to LC709 type A, and then I have the one for S-log 3. So again, this one won't work correctly, so let's jump over to S-log 3, and I'll use the S-log 3, S-gamut 3 Cine to LC709 type A. The type A part, I think, just refers to the level of contrast in it, maybe. It says it in that PDF, though, if you want to read more about it. So we'll drop it in here. which is basically applying it to the footage. And that's going to do a few things for us. That's going to correct our color primaries to, well, sort of a Rec 709. It's LC 709, but that's just kind of like a flavor on Rec 709. But it's still, you're still now in a 709 gamma and color space. And it also sort of fixes a bit of our little X problem there. And then you get to, I guess, choose how punchy you want the image from here, and you would continue your grading from this point on. So that's applying a LUT from the manufacturer. Pretty much all of them, like all the different brands, supply these, and you can download them and you can apply them in just this way. Just make sure that you're matching it up correctly and that you're following. There's a fly in here, it's driving me nuts. Missed him. Just make sure that you're following the correct exposure, that your color and that your gamma are what they're requiring for that. Otherwise, you're just adding more of a headache. Okay, moving on to, so that's manufacturer LUTs. Now, LUT calc is a way that will work for everybody. So should we do that first because it's good for everything, or should we talk about transforms? Okay, let's do LUT calc. Let's say that you're like me and you have this one where you shot with the right gamma, we're S-log2, but we changed the color space to S-gamma 3 cine, and the manufacturer LUTs don't work. And we don't have an 11-step chart in order to like try and correct it ourselves, and we don't want to play with any of that. It's just a shot of a person on a beach, and the LUT that we apply doesn't work, so how do we make our own? Well, there's a website, let me close this, called LUTCalc, which is really awesome for just sort of like a free tool that's out there. And there's extensions, you can do it in your browser, there's different ways, but this is the online portal one, which is just free and easy to use. Just go there and use it. And they've got some cameras built in up here, but let's just go to generic, which lets us, if you're not using one of the cameras provided, the reason why you could use these cameras is that they have like Cine EI compensation. And the best part is that if you have your exposure like wrong, I said you have to expose by the manufacturer as well. Well, if you have your exposure too high, you can also do stop correction in here, and I'll demonstrate that on the curve over here. Oh, let me get my face. Let me move my face a little bit here. So let's put the Y position up. Yeah, up is probably better. Put myself in the top corner, and I'll move myself over a little bit too. There, now we can see pretty much everything. So here we go. We're talking about when it says rec, gamma, and gamut, that's what you recorded in. So we recorded in S-log3. You can see there's a whole bunch of different gammas. Think of this as like your luminance curve, your like exposure curve, if you will. And then gamut would be the colors, which colors, how colors are supposed to be represented, where the primaries are, what red is, that kind of thing. That's your gamut. And we recorded, so for that first one we did S-log2 with S-gamma 3 cine. And our output gamma, if we wanted it to be converting to Rec 709, that's where we would choose this. So there's a lot of different output gammas that you can use though. Like if you wanted to convert it to something else, like maybe you wanted to convert it to like an Alexa gamma and then apply an Alexa LUT, you could do that. Because you can, if you have a LUT that you really like, you can convert your footage to the camera that LUT's for, and then apply that LUT. So if you had a workflow for Panasonic all figured out, you could shoot on Sony, convert it to Panasonic, and then use your Panasonic workflow. But if you're just trying to do something finished, we'll do Rec 709 800%, which is a bit of a wider dynamic range Rec 709, which still gives you some room to play in post. And then for output gamma, we'll choose Rec 709 again. So we're going from S-log2 S-gamma 3 cine to both Rec 709. There's a bunch of tools below here that you can use to adjust things, as you can see. Highlight, black level, knee, etc. I wouldn't bother with these if you're just trying to do a straight up conversion, but you can if you want. So like if you expand this one, for instance, and change the highlight level, you can choose what 90% reflected white, which on the chart is those white chips, how it represents over here on the curve. You can tweak it to your desire. Now let's take a look at this curve. So in is S-log2, which is represented by the red line, and then out is Rec 709. That's what we're doing to it with the blue line. But let's say that we shot incorrectly. If we go +1, +2, +3, +4, so you can see how stop correction is going to affect the output curve, and you can go the other way as well. So you can go down. So that's what you can do if you're not at the correct exposure. And then you can create a custom name for the file. You can click auto title and it'll call like S-log2 S-gamma 3 cine to Rec 709 with 800. So it like gives you like a name for it. And then if you're grading with it in Resolve or in Premiere or something like that, then you want to choose Grading LUT and General Cube. And I would turn off the clipping. If you're going straight to delivery, the reason why you could put these clips on is so that you're doing the clipping there, the blacks and the whites are clipped off, and then you're within the range for delivery. But if you want to still be able to finesse it in post a little bit, going unclipped is better because then you're not clipping the data. You can decide in post where your upper and lower limits are going to be. It's probably the better way to do it. And your input and output range is important as well. Just if you're shooting full, if you're shooting log in camera, your input range is probably 109%. And if you're going to be editing the thing afterwards, leave it at 109% as well. And then I know the Resolve supports 65 type cube files, but depending on your NLE, you might have to drop it down to 33. And if you're going into a monitoring LUT, usually you can't use 65, you have to use like 33. So once we're done all that, I'm just giving a demonstration of LUT calc for some reason. There's an instruction video from the maker of this you can watch as well. But we'll click Generate LUT, and it will make it, and we'll save it to our desktop here, and we'll keep the same file name. Then you have to load that LUT into your NLE, which with Resolve, I found the fastest way is actually to right-click on LUTs and choose Open File Location. And I have a folder here called LUT Calc, which will be for the ones that we drop in there. And let me just drop it in like that. And now we can right-click and choose Refresh. And now we have our LUT Calc folder with that LUT in it. Now if we take that and drop it down here, it does the correction. And then you can see nothing crazy happened. It made our X nice. And we still have headroom if we want to expand this. As you can see, we can bring it down and we can make it more contrasty, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And if we look at our vector scope, then actually, are these set up right? No, I'm gonna go 2x zoom with the skin tone indicator. That'll make it a lot easier to see. So our vector scope, we can see that our saturation is a little bit low, but our colors are lining up correctly with the boxes, and our skin tones are on the skin tone line, and so everything has been converted well for us. And then if we wanted, we could just, something basic, we add another node, and now you can just add contrast. That thing that we talked about in the previous video, now you can just add contrast. So we could, increase the contrast there, and scoop the pivot up a little bit for getting that middle gray, like I said, just below the midline. And there we go. We've got a finished image, and we don't need to see the chart. We have the chart, we can see it, but we don't need to see it because we know what we shot. So with LUT Calc, we shot S-Log2 with SGAMMET 3 Cine. We shot for our 18% gray was correctly exposed, so we don't need to have an exposure compensation. And again, if you just join in the stream, 18% gray, you can literally just buy like a $10 card on Amazon. It'll probably get you most of the way there. Set your zebras or your waveform to target the correct exposure, which for S-Log2 is like 32%, but you should probably overexpose a little bit. And then go to LUT Calc, generate it, and then drop it in. You can drop this in Premiere, in Final Cut, in Resolve, and there you go. Image, good to go, right? Now there is an easier way to do this if you have Resolve. I don't know if you can do this easier in Premiere or in Final Cut. Again, I used to use Premiere a lot, but I don't know, I've kind of like forgotten a lot of it since switching to Resolve, and I know they've added a lot of tools. And Final Cut I've just never really been well versed in. So I'm going to reset everything we've got going on here. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to use a color space transform. And there's two ways to do this as well. The best thing about Resolve is there's 100 ways to do everything. And that was going to be sort of like my alternative title to this, because whenever you make a video on working in Resolve, you always get comments of like, I do it this way, you could do it that way, you could do it this way. The results often end up the same, but there's just so many ways to approach things. So right now we're talking about sort of managing color in Resolve, which has a lot of tools for it. I think a color space transform is probably the easiest way to understand, especially if you just followed what we did with LUT Calc, which is just a way to convert things. It's kind of like that, but built in Resolve. So if we go to Open Effects and choose Color Space Transform from our Resolve Effects Color, throw that on our node instead. Now I'm only using one node to demonstrate this. There is a node workflow, and this is true for Premiere as well. You don't want to necessarily do things that are destructive before you do things that are going to be artistic, well, unless they're minor, because let me demonstrate that first, actually, because it's a good little lesson here. Those Sony LUTs that we were talking about, right? Let's go over to the S-Log3 one where we have the LUT for in Sony. So let's drop that LUT on here. Now, let's say that we had overexposed our image early on. So we're going to add a node before. And with Resolve, it works kind of like how Premiere works top to bottom. This one works left to right. Whatever happens left happens first, and it's prioritized like that. If you load a bunch of stuff onto the same node, Resolve has an internal way of prioritizing that. So maybe it does saturation before contrast or whatever, but it's easier if you break it up in nodes so you can see what's going on where, and you can disable them or delete them as they go. So let's say that we really overexpose this image for S-Log3. Like, we're not actually clipping anywhere, even though it kind of looks like it, but you know, we shot too hot for S-Log, and then we pop on this LUT. Well, now the LUT is expecting to increase the exposure because it's expecting to get 41% middle gray, but we gave it, what did we give it? Like, I don't know, 70% middle gray? So it's like, it blew it out, right? And I'm pretty sure we're hard clipped now. Well, if we add a new node and say we go, oh, I just got to recover those highlights. So we go to bring these down like that, we actually had decent success with it. But now let's say that because it's actually quite hard to clip S-Log3, which is a great thing about it. So now let's see if we can recover this one. Okay, so I had to really look at what I had to do with this exposure here. I had to put middle gray at like 90% in order to. Now, if you had a light source or a specular highlight or the sky, it would have clipped easier, but this is a, you know, mostly evenly lit chart, so it worked a little bit better. So we've got crazy overexposed image, which right now we could correct it. If we added another node, we could just reverse that and bring it back down and we're fine. But if we applied the LUT first, because LUTs, even the manufacturer LUTs, they're destructive, the LUT's boosting that up, converting it, transforming it, whatever. Now with our next node, we can't, it doesn't matter what we do, even if we bring the exposure all the way down here, these white values are gone. And our cyan is mostly gone as well. Why is OBS flashing? That was trippy. Did you see that? When I go full screen and back, does it break the stream at all, or is it fine? Let me just have a quick peek at that. So this is me. I'm just watching the stream back. I want to see what you guys see. Okay, it just flashes and then goes full screen. It's fine. OBS was flashing when I did that, so I wanted to make sure that that we don't break it. Okay. Let's see what the chat is saying. Tonne? Okay. I see we're on topic down there. All right. And 1 second here. Cool. Okay. Resolve. All right. So we can't bring it back. The LUT is destructive. I'm going to show you how the advantage of transforms is that they're not. But if you make a cube file with LUTCalc, which is what we just did, let's reset all this and go over to S-Log2 file. So what is this? I don't know what we have going on here, so I'm going to just reset that. But if we do the exact same demonstration, but here with S-Log2, so we'll take our exposure up to Crazy Town, and then we apply that S-Log2 conversion that we made with LUTCalc, and then come down here and try to fix it. We have the same issue. Maybe I went a bit overboard with the exposure, but okay. So we have the same issue. There's no way to bring those highlights back. We can try by reversing the gain. They're just gone. So that would be, I guess, the disadvantage of LUTCalc. You can use it in all platforms and it's great, but it is destructive, just like LUTs from the manufacturer. They're LUTs. LUTCalc is making a LUT for you. It's a great tool, but it's still a LUT, so it's still destructive. Okay. Now we're talking about color space transforms. So we'll do that same 3-node operation, but in the middle, we will go OpenFX and we'll add a color space transform. This will bring up a new toolbox over here, which is very similar to what we just did with LUTCalc. You have your input color space, which for this one's S-Log3. So we're going to scroll down. Same thing too, you can convert it to other ones if you want to grade it differently. So we have S-Gamut3 Cine, and our input gamma is S-Log3. I got those backwards when I just said it a minute ago. But now for output color space and output gamma, you can see it's pretty much just instantly looks great. And that's because we're using timeline, which is the other way that you could do this. If you didn't want to do it clip by clip, node by node, you could go to File, Project Settings, and you can do it in here under Color Management. You see how you have timeline color space, which, why is that 2.2? It should be 2.4. Hopefully that wasn't a problem. If you use 2.2, and then you like grade it a certain way and then put it up to YouTube, which I think was expecting 2.4, can look contrasty or whatever. But anyway, I must have played around with this and then didn't put it back. Anyway, you can also come in here and choose color managed, and then you can do the exact same controls. You can go input color space, timeline color space, output color space. So you could make your whole project basically without needing to do these for each clip or whatever. You could just be, my entire project is S-Log 3S Gamma 3 Cine, and I want all of that to be Rec 709, and that's that. Or it could be Blackmagic RAW or Blackmagic Film, and I want that to be extended video. You could just make the whole enchilada work up in here. But because I know that our timeline color space is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, then and our output is Gamma 2.4 as well, then when we choose use timeline, we're just automatically getting Rec 709 2.4, so we don't have to choose it. But if you did choose the Gamma for that, be careful about one in here. So you see you have Gamma 2.2, Gamma 2.4. If we choose Gamma 2.4, it doesn't change. And if we choose 2.2, it does change a little bit, obviously. But also look out for Rec 709. There's Rec 709, Rec 709A. If we choose them, you see how they get much darker? I believe that's because it's using Rec 709 Scene instead of 2.2 or 2.4, which would be the same one. This is just a theory, I could be wrong. But if you look in the project one, you see how you have the option for Rec 709 Scene. That is about similar in darkness to the one to the Rec 709 over here in output gamma. So I think that's the one that it's using. So I would use Gamma 2.4 is what I would use, or use timeline if you're set to that. Okay, anyway, so that's the color space transform. And then depending on what your shot is like, you might want to enable tone mapping. For this one, we're actually fine because again, we shot exactly correct like exposure. But again, let's say that our exposure was a bit hat. You see how we go way out of the waveform? We're in like just crazy clipped. Well, if we enable tone mapping to luminance mapping, well now that's reeled back in and then we can play with it afterwards. And the same thing goes for the gamut mapping down here. It's on none. If our saturation, maybe you had like a red channel that was going to clip or something funky like that, you could, I just missed it. I'm going to get that guy. But if you enable saturation mapping, then you can control your saturation max and your knee and save those aspects from like being clipped out by applying the transform. How? Make sure that's not related. I've got some people messaging me if ever I'm missing something. Oh, thanks. I was covering the CST. Live streaming's tough. Okay, let me move that. Sorry about that, guys. I had that up for LUTCalc and then I didn't move it back. It's okay. It'll just be a stupid moment on the stream. Thank you to, I think, the couple for Dennis and some other people and the moderators that let me know about that. All right, is that okay? Maybe we'll just scale it down a little bit so we can see everything. I'm experimenting with this. I haven't really ever like moved this on the fly using this updated thing. Okay, that's all right. So I'll just go over that real quick. So everything I just said still applies. You just weren't able to see it, obviously, so this is stupid. So basically, input color space, look at this thing. When you saw it in the timeline, it's the same way that's listed over here, because I'm assuming you were still able to see my project settings, right? Even though I have my window up. Is the chat making fun of me? Yeah. Well deserved. Okay, so we have our input and our input here, and then our outputs as timeline. And what I was showing is I said that be careful if you use the gamma of Rec 709, because it makes it darker, because I think that's the one that's using scene. So you could use Gamma 2.4 or use timeline if it's set to 2.4 anyway. And then I was showing the luminance mapping. So this was set to none, and I had the first node sort of overexposing the image. Well, now if you set this to luminance mapping, you can see the waveform, it brings it back in. And then down here, I was showing none for gamut. You can switch it to saturation mapping, and then you could control, like if I change saturation max here, you see how the image is a lot less saturated, and I can crank it up. So it gives you a little bit more control over that. You don't always need these options if your image just happens to be shot to spec, but how often does that happen where you like nail everything perfectly, right? Normally there's some tweaks to be done, so this will help you with that. But let's say that we don't enable this. Let me actually just reset these ones. So we have an overexposed image, and we'll overexpose it crazy just like we did with the LUTs. And then we have our color space transform, which is converting it to Rec 709. And now with our next node, we can bring it down. And if you look, you can actually, even though this curve, let me not use a curve. Let me let me see if I can do it with gain. There. You can actually bring everything back. So the cool thing about using the transform as sort of that step instead of using what you could produce with LUTCalc. Again, LUTCalc is outstanding. I'm not complaining about it, and it's great if you use Premiere. but it is a destructive. Like it's like once that's on, anything that happened up to that point, that's baked in. Now you got to work with what's left over. With a transform, you don't. As you can see, you can then pull it back down, and that happens whether or not you enable the tone mapping. But that's why generally I would say I wouldn't enable tone mapping and gamut mapping until it was our last transform step. If you were going to do multiple like pathways, you could take it from this, put it into that, then put it into this, and take it into that, or whatever. Don't map things until the last one. That way you can still play with everything as you go. But it's pretty cool, right? How you can do that with a transform. And the same thing obviously applies if you change your entire timeline to a different color space, because that couldn't possibly be destructive, because if it was, then there'd be no node-based workflow at that point, right? So both of those work. Another thing, let me check how we're doing here. So CSTs, getting LUTs, LUT calc, color management. Okay, ACEs. I get asked about ACEs a lot because I normally just breeze by it. Instead of this node arrangement, so let me just hide those two. Instead of a color space transform, maybe you could just use ACEs, which is essentially the same idea, but rather than it being this list of things that you choose from here, there's a standard, if you will, that's what ACEs is. It's like Academy color encoding stand system or stand. I don't know, I'm making it up, but it's something like that. So let's get rid of the transform. You'll notice up here there's an ACEs transform and put that in its place. It's very similar. You choose your ACEs version, and then for input, you have to do the same thing. They're just comboed here as to like the exact combination. So we're still using the same clip. So we're still going to be slog3, sgamut3 cine. So that's our input. And our output, we can choose Rec 709. And there we go. And then there's a blend, I guess, too, if you wanted to like control the intensity of your ACEs application. So that's that. We just converted it to Rec 709. I didn't produce the same result as the color space transform. That's the thing, I guess, is that although there's multiple ways to transform, not all the transforms produce the exact same result. I was saying in Resolve you can do everything 1,000 ways, and you can, because now with this next node you could make it look exactly like that color space transform, or you could make the color space transform look like this. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you which one which one is better or worse. We could analyze it from based on, you know, how closely it matched what we were looking for, what we think of our skin tones. You know, that's up to you really, but it's just another way to do it. But let's put the destructive test on it. So we'll put this first node in, again, crazy overexposed. Let's put the second one on, and you'll notice that we cannot recover. So ACEs is destructive, at least in this array of application. And I don't do ACEs a lot, and I'll tell you why. It's because for some things it looks great. I found that the ACEs looked really, really good for the A7S3, but I find that it looks terrible for the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. So for me, I guess it's like having a standardized system only works if everybody's using it and it gets built out and there's like, and the standards get enhanced and it gets better and better, and you know, you have multiple experienced authors playing off each other to like, whatever, you get the idea. If right now there's some that are great, but we're still, that's my chair by the way, I'm not farting on camera. There's still a lot of like flaky ACEs implementations out there. And so I'd rather just use a transform because it's quick and easy, and then do it however I want to do it afterwards. And if I'm using something that's not Resolve, I'll just go to LUT calc, generate one, base it on the over-under exposure that I did, throw it on there, move on with my life. If there is a way to make ACEs non-destructive for this type of testing, I don't know what it is. But yeah, something to consider. Anyway, as far as, you know, my opinion on it, again, there have been some really great ACEs ones, so if you like it, then go for it. Now, we were talking a bit about converting from one to another and then applying a workflow that way. So let's do that, just to give you an example of that. And I suppose you could use ACEs or color space transform, whatever you want for that. So let's say that we've got this node here, and let's just add a couple nodes. So let's say that we have this footage, which is slog3, sgamut3 cine, but we have a workflow for our, I'm about to say this camera brand name, but I've been working on it because my German accent is terrible. And I was actually, I was bugging one of our German viewers. So a lot of Americans say Airy, which is not correct. And then I say Ari, which is a bit too like piratey, you know, Ari. So it should be like Ari, 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 Ari Alexa, Ari Alexa. Anyway, I'm trying to practice Ari, 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 Ari. When you say a word enough times, it sounds ridiculous, right? Anyway, the Ari, Ari, Ari. Ari. Anyway, that I can't do a strong R after an H. I find it hard. Anyway, we've got an Ari Alexa log C to Rec 709 LUT here, but we have to have an image that's in log C. But we don't. We have an image that's in slog 3 sgamut 3 cine. But say that we really like this LUT, okay? Then what we can do with this middle node here, we're going to leave that first node in case we want to make some exposure changes before we hit it hard with, say, ACES, which is then going to bake that in. So we'll put on an ACES transform in this middle one, and we'll go from slog 3 sgamut 3 cine, boom, to not to Rec 709, to log C is what we just said. Is there not? There's got to be a log C in here, isn't there? Oh no, you can't use ACES for this implementation, can you? Because ACES is for finishing. Yeah, so scratch that. You can, but you don't want to. You need to use a color space transform. There's another reason why color space transforms rock. So we'll put that on here. Forgot about that. So we're going to go sgamut 3 cine, slog 3. Sorry if that was confusing. I was just on the ACES mindset. Again, that's another reason. ACES is just kind of like get things to a standard and then be done with it. Color space transforms are more fun. So now for output, oh, am I blocking something else now? What does this say? Let's see. I've got people giving me updates as we go here. You wouldn't work inside ACES color space, just straight going to ACES Rec 709. ACES consists of the IDT, which converts to linear ACES, which then will transform to ACES CCCT log space, which is used for grading. At the end, it'll be transformed back to linear for VFX. That's a perfect explanation, but I don't think that that is something that we should worry about in this video at the moment because we're already probably like an hour deep. But thank you, Dennis. I thought you were going to comment on my Ari pronunciation. Anyway, so for output color space, let's choose the Alexa log C thing that we're looking for here. So Ari Alexa for output color space, and then Ari log C for the gamma. So now we basically just went from one log to another. If you look, that was before, that's after. Before, after. It doesn't really change a whole lot, right? I think Dennis is just trying to be in the live stream. So basically, ACES transformed to ACES CCT, then grading, then ACES CCT to Rec 709. There's the answer to what I just said. You have to transform to ACES CCT, then do the grading, then ACES CCT back to Rec 709. Again, though, it seems like a color space transform, unless you're required to work in ACES. If you're just doing this for yourself and just want to make it look good and that's whatever, if you're not required to work in ACES, I think color space transforms have a much more logical workflow, and because you can sort of recreate it with LUTCalc, it allows you to apply it to more systems and create a more useful thing. Also, you can create LUTs in Resolve. I read online, maybe this is an earlier version, but I read online that you couldn't put your color space transform into the LUT if you, so see, I'll demonstrate this actually. We'll do it at the end of the step. I'll then generate a LUT out of this and we'll see how it applies. Okay, so we've got a transform here that goes to log C, and as I showed you by turning it off and on, it looks pretty much the same. Now for our next node, we can drop on our Ari Alexa log C to Rec 709 LUT, boom, and we get a similar result to when we just transformed straight through, but maybe, like I said, this was your favorite LUT, or you have some tweaks in it, or you made it, you know, you love it, whatever. So that's how you can go, and you could really transform across because they're non-destructive. You could add a couple in there if you want. And something that was pointed out to me, again, by Dennis, he's a good, great viewer, is that we won't be able to demonstrate this because I don't have any raw up right now, but I guess Blackmagic's been adding, if you shoot on Blackmagic raw, they've been adding more and more conversions to their decode options. So rather than just going through the different Blackmagic choices, you can now convert your raw directly to, like, I think Panasonic has, there's like a Vlog in there, there might be like a red one in there, and there might be adding more in the future. So you can just go right in here and decode to a different space and gamma right away without even using color space transform. So that's pretty wild. So you could just make your Blackmagic Vlog and then just drop on your Vlog LUT. So that's kind of cool. But otherwise, we can do it here with the color space transform. So then we added our LUT on, and then again, then we could add in another node, and now we could do some finishing stuff. We're like, oh yeah, we'll make it more contrasty and, you know, whatever. And then now we have essentially a graded Ari log C image, although it's been transformed. And there's a lot more to an image than just, I hate that this flashes. There's a lot more to an image than just the transform, though. Keep that in mind. Even if you do transform it and then add a LUT, what makes an Alexa special isn't just its gamma. It's obviously like the sensor and the actual color encoding on the camera and that kind of thing. So you can make your workflow make sense there, but it's not going to give you don't magically have an Alexa all of a sudden. Don't let anybody fool you about that. Although we're getting pretty close with some of these cameras lately. They're like cheaper cameras, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, so we talked about the whole LUT idea. So I'm going to delete this contrast thing. So I said if we wanted to make this as a sort of like a one-step LUT, and maybe two, we wanted to have it where there's like a baked-in... No, actually, I'm not going to do that because that's weird. Let's say that we have it more saturated as well. So... Okay, so we have a more saturated, I wouldn't put it there, but we'll put it there anyway. It's more saturated. The color space then transforms it to the, you know what? I keep changing my mind. This would be easy to see if we went to Rec 709. So let's say that we did a color space transform to exactly what we've just been doing all along. S-gamma 3 cine, S-log 3, and then at the end, we put a little bit of contrast on it. People were saying that if you then make this a LUT, that only the contrast, only that last node would be there because color space transforms don't get baked in the LUT. But I've been finding that they do. So if we right click on this, the clip that has the work done on it, we can choose generate LUT. Let's do a 65 point. I'll save it to my desktop and we'll call it test LUT. And then now I'll reset this. So this clip has nothing on it, but I will open the file location for LUTs. And I will move the test LUT in there just loose. And then we'll refresh this. And so now we have our test LUT. And if I drop this on, that sure looks to me like the color space transform is in there. So we basically just did what LUTCalc does. We put in our inputs and outputs and then generated a LUT. So you can do that all right in Resolve. But now I could share this LUT with you. I could say, here you go. This is converts, in this case, S-log 3 S-gamma 3 cine to Rec 709 with the contrast that I decided to add, and then I could send that to you. But as you can see, it works fine. So I don't know, maybe that was an older version of Resolve. I'm not saying those people are wrong. They're definitely wrong about Resolve. What am I using? I think I'm using 16.2.5. So as of that version, you can do that. So that's cool. Okay, let me chime in the chat for a minute, see if there's any big things going on, and if there's any questions answered, and then we'll move into HLG just as a quick comparison for that. Hopefully this has been helpful up to this point, though. Okay, let me put it back on me and turn off two me's. And let's jump over here. Okay, so because I was worried about skipping some super chats, my lovely moderators have been sending them to me independently. So Andy Dufresne is a new member. Thank you much. Thank you much. Okay, I'm gonna go lay down. Thanks a lot for that. We got one here from Strons that says, as always, great content. Thank you very much. Thank you for your generosity. Hopefully you're still watching at this point. Prasad said, your picture in pictures in the way of the inspector in Resolve. Thanks, Rob. Thank you for the super chat, Prasad. Check your phone, silly. The phone wasn't giving notifications. It was only giving me the WhatsApp notifications. I thought it was working. You ever guys notice that with your phone that it's almost like it kind of goes to sleep sometimes? You don't get notifications, and then when you pick it up, you get 8 emails and everything all at once. We got a super chat here from Loris that says, thank you for detoxing me from camera conspiracies. I feel I'm learning something today. Gotta love camera conspiracies, though. And then Caspar said, this is misleading. If you use ACES via the project settings and set the IDTs, which do not clip, this is a quirk of that OFX plugin. Okay. Again, you got to tone down that language a little bit there, Caspar. I replied to your comment. I personally find it less inviting to want to reply generously to people when they start with such sort of like an inflammatory first sentence. I even said when I was saying that, I was like, I'm not sure. As far as I know, this node-based ACES workflow does do this. I didn't say this is a fact and this is why you shouldn't use ACES. I said maybe let me know in the comments otherwise. So this is misleading is a bit strong of language. Maybe English isn't your first language, but I find it a bit off-putting. But you're absolutely correct, and I got mentioned over there as well that there are other ways. I'm just saying that the thing that I demonstrated there is a fact. I demonstrated that if you put ACES as an in-between node with a Rec 709 end result, that it doesn't work. If it's a glitch with the OFX plugin, fair enough. So you're suggesting that you should do it via the project settings and set the IDTs which do not clip. Seems reasonable. And then should make his phone vibrate or something. Okay, so if I missed any other super chats, let me just check the chat now. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll through here. So I saw the one there from Loris, and then there's one here from Peter that says, "It's my birthday and I'm watching this. What better present than an undone one? Thanks, G." Thank you. That's what are you sending me money for on your birthday? Happy birthday to you. And thanks for joining the stream. That's awesome. Okay. So the people that are asking about VFX, I am not VFX person. I like rarely do stuff like that. You know, I try my best to know as much as I can about different processes, but there are dedicated expert channels on visual effects, and I wouldn't even want to dabble in that. It's also why I don't make videos on ACES. As you can see, my ACES understanding is very like high level. Is that the expression? Like I only kind of know like the top level of stuff, and all I ever really offer when it comes to ACES is I tried the current IDTs for said camera and it looks good for that camera at this or whatever. Like if that's your workflow, I can be like, the ACES works well for the Sony a7S III, you know what I mean? But I'm not at that level when it comes to like ACES knowledge. I don't ever use it. Okay, so let me jump back in and we'll talk about HLG because that was one of the earlier questions. Let me check my notes. Good. Okay, so let's jump back into Resolve here. Let me make sure I'm not blocking anything. Okay, so these were the different S-Log3 ones. Now, dealing with over-under exposure. So this one's 2 stops over, which often overexposure can produce a nice result when it comes to noise handling. You do have to be careful when you hear people say overexposed to produce noise. If you're shooting in something that's like Rec 709 like this, it doesn't work quite the same way, and that's because of the way that information is distributed. Rec 709 usually has like a knee on top, even if it's like an auto knee set by your camera, and that compresses the highlight information. So if you move your scene too high up, then the information that maybe was once just going to be not that important highlights, well, maybe now you're putting more information into that kneed off portion. Now when you try to pull it back down, you have less information from which to pull down from, and then it kind of gets sloppy. The advantage of log is that all the stops above middle gray have about the same amount of information. So you can shift things around a little bit better, and they have more information than some of the really lower stops. So if you put, but the interesting thing there too is that there's still more information in dark areas of log than there is in like linear raw, but still less information than there would be at like middle gray and above. So underexposing is worse because then you're putting your value. Why am I doing it this way? Let me do it this way. Because then you're putting your valuable information in the lowest data amount. So then when you try to raise that back up, you're expanding from a lower data at your noise floor, and it gets terrible. If you're shooting up high and you're sharing the same amount of information at every stop, then there's not any one is any better or worse than another one, as long as you don't go too crazy with it. So that's why overexposure in log is okay. Overexposure in Rec 709 is not okay. Overexposure in raw is okay as well, because you are going to convert that probably to log. But if you overexpose in raw and then convert directly to Rec 709, you might experience the same kind of problems. It just has to do with the way the data is distributed. I don't know if you can see it. I have like weird little like charts here that aren't exactly accurate because they're hand drawn, and the exposure won't really work for this, but yeah, forget it. You can't see it. Just picture a bar graph where each one it doubles. That's raw. So like the amount of information that's in the top stop is twice that of the stop down. So lots of information, but that means that your lowest stop has like no information, where log is more like we quickly get information, like we quickly ramp up and then try to keep it even as we go across. Anyway, let's go back in here. Now, we were going to play with this one. This is 2 stops over S-Log3. So if we just go straight, let's do the color space transform technique. So if we add this in, if we just go right ahead and convert this to S-Log3, and again, I hope that this has now shown you that you don't need this chart. I'm not, DSC Labs is great to send me these charts to test and show my videos and stuff like that. I'm not trying to say don't buy them. Again, if you want to make LUTs, these will make your life a lot easier. But these transforms don't require this. Like the image could just be black and I could still apply these transforms and know that I'm doing them correctly. The only thing is now we're overexposed, right? So the way that we talked about was that if your image is overexposed like this, you can enable tone mapping and then you will enable saturation mapping as well. And then we could add another node because it's non-destructive, and we could, you know, monkey around with it to bring that back down to below middle gray. And then we could add like, so, well, we'll do another node here. And then we could either do your like little curve approach where you're expanding it this way or that way. And you could finesse it back in, even though our image was actually effectively overexposed before these steps, because we were able to bring it back down. And again, we have a reasonable image here. Something else that you can do that is a bit contentious because some people think that it's making a transform no longer accurate is that you can kind of reverse what overexposing log does in the first place. And you can do that preemptively. Again, people will tell you not to do this because now your transform is no longer completely accurate. And they're not wrong, but if you get good at it, so to speak, then you can keep your luminance values into like a reasonable position. So I showed this a little bit on the previous video. If I now take my my curve here, and somebody mentioned too that you can qualify that off the chart, but again, so if I press there, you see that's where middle gray is now. It's up here. So if we pull this down, you see how we're lowering the exposure. The reason why you can do this with curves is to keep the kind of smoothness to the shot. What Resolve has is offset, which again, if we have a Premiere or Final Cut translator in there, is there like an offset control that works the same way in those NLEs? Like I don't feel there is. There's an exposure slider, but the exposure slider, in my experience, works more kind of like what I'm showing here with the curves. So you can kind of like reverse the curve that was applied to get the transform to not overexpose anymore. Does that make sense? But the way that you can do it in Resolve, which is easier, is to use offset. If you watch this X down here, as I bring the offset down, see how it kind of slides everything down in a more like linear fashion, which makes the transform still be reasonable. Let's do, let's compare it by adding the transform to the no stops over, and then this one. So with the offset here and here, and I'll turn off the mapping. That's the other reason why we were getting a weird result. So here's if you apply the transform to a correctly exposed image. Here's what happens if you apply it to an image that has been overexposed, and then we've adjusted our offset to put, you know, middle gray in the same position. So we don't get the same result. We get a contrast to your image, and that's just generally what happens when you overexpose. When you shoot with more exposure, you're getting more light into the scene, and then of course you're going to get a more punchy image just naturally. It's like to keep in check just to make sure that I'm not skipping something important here. When you mentioned before, linear gamma in Node using gain works almost exactly like the exposure setting inside the raw tab. Linear gamma in Node using gain works almost exactly like the exposure setting inside the raw tab on log footage, of course. That's cool to know. We were talking about a linear gain adjustment as an option. Apparently that works the same as that's another thing I've noticed too, is that if you're using Blackmagic RAW footage, you can use the like lift gamma gain controls almost like, you know, non-destructive adjustments in like a RAW develop. It's kind of like the whole workflow is pretty good. That's another reason to use DaVinci, well, especially if you're shooting on Blackmagic. I don't know why you wouldn't if you were using Blackmagic camera. Anyway, what were we talking about here? Yeah, so this is basic with the transform applied, and then this is with, make sure I've got the same thing cooking, yeah. And then this is with the offset brought down. Now, instead, let's reset that offset and do what I was showing you with the curve. So if I kind of like reverse the curve here a little bit, and now let's jump back and forth, you can see that obviously, again, I still have these like more expressed highlights, but I would say that in general, we're getting the luminance isn't perfectly distributed. I will admit that, but we're getting sort of a similar result, and you can, you know, you can play with it a little bit too if you, whoops, to dial it in. And if you bring this in, then you can raise that up or bring it down this way if you want to like squeeze it down a little bit. So I don't know. It's not going to be exactly the same, and I'm the first one to admit that because I gave this advice in the previous one. But I do think that if you're not looking at a chart and you're not trying to compare it back and forth like I just was like this, you can get an image that has a really nice texture to it and looks acceptable. And I've done this a lot when when I've had a situation that was difficult to expose. Maybe I didn't have like a monitor with me, or was using a camera that I was shooting in log, but the tools just really aren't there in order to really dial it in. It doesn't have any kind of like gamma preview. I didn't have a monitor. There's no waveforms. There's nothing. I don't have a card with me. I bring it back in post to look at it. I was like, oh, I was like a full stop over on that. You know, maybe it was a sunny day outside. I found that if I just make this kind of like anti-curve before applying anything, that you get a result that looks great. And as long as you're using a log where you can expand that data a little bit from the high end, I think that you get a pretty good result. And we might not be able to see it here, but there obviously is generally noise improvements. I'm willing to bet that over the internet this is not going to show up well. But let's see. So this is like the noise of that one, and let's go to this one. So you can see how much noise there is. It's the same, like this is this one, and this is with this anti-curve, and then applying the transform. So overexposure by, this is 2 stops. You can see the kind of noise reduction that you get. Hopefully this translates well. So even though you may be not perfectly hitting your luminance values, especially when it comes to color intensity, let's look at this one and then look at this one. So in order for this one to be fair, we'd have to like add, like, we could add saturation just to test it, but whenever you shoot brighter, your colors are also going to be more saturated as well. But let's just increase the saturation just for the sake of comparing the two to see how they fall. I went a little bit overkill on that one. Just want to see. So yeah, you can see that we do have a bit of a shift in how the transform is going to affect that image. And that was a complaint that some people mentioned, and it's a valid complaint. But you have to ask yourself, I guess, like what's more important to you for a given shot if you want this level of, you know, noise reduction, or you want to keep it perfectly in spec, but you want to deal with that noise afterwards, you know, with actual noise reduction. Okay. And then I think I said I was going to talk about HLG, and then I didn't somehow. I don't know how we got distracted like that. How long have we been running here, guys? I don't know how long is too long for, like a tutorial after the fact. Going for an hour. Oh, that's not too bad. I thought it was going to be much worse than that. We'll talk about HLG just now. Let me just check and see. Okay, cool. How many people are watching the stream right now? 400 people? Okay, cool. All right, so HLG is, there's some similar things to consider there. HLG does have overexposure headroom because the top half of the curve, if you will, is like a log curve, so we're going to get better distribution of the highlights. It doesn't perform exactly like log, but it does. You can't go like 3 stops over with HLG, but you can go like 1 stop over and also improve your noise that way. And then the bottom half is more... okay, so gamma is a non-linear function, so you can't call things linear, but there can be like linear portions, or like, but it's almost like if you combined... Yeah, it's not. I was gonna say it's like if you kind of combine, you know, Rec 709 and then add like a log curve on it, but then you would say, well, isn't that kind of like a knee? So yeah, in a sense, in a weird sense, HLG is kind of like having a super knee, but where highlight compression isn't as focused as much as data distribution for later on being able to expand that for HDR content. So what we're looking at here is HLG. I think, like I said, basic EV. I might be a little bit underexposed. Let me switch over to the waveform. Probably just a touch underexposed. And then this one's 1 stop over. So same principles apply, but if you're shooting HLG, often you'll find that there's not as many friendly tools. Like if you go to, like, I don't think there's going to be an ACES for like, we can look at it. Usually, like if we look at Sony, for instance, it's just S-Log, right? And if you go to LUTCalc, there's not going to be one for HLG or whatever. So you kind of have to do the work yourself by just knowing what's going on, and you can get a reasonable result. So if we add a color space transform, and we know that we shot... Okay, so in the camera, on Sony anyway, you can choose either Rec 709 or Rec 2020. If they don't give you the option, it's probably 2020, because otherwise it's not going to work for HDR delivery. So I left it on Rec 2020, and Rec 2020 is probably the best setting to leave it on if you want to future-proof your footage, because maybe you do want to do HDR. If you put it in Rec 7, if you shoot it in Rec 709, you can't then put that in a Rec 2020 as nicely as you can take 2020 and put it to 709, because you always want to go downward. You always want to shrink. You don't want to expand whenever possible. So we were Rec 2020 for our color space. And our gamma, so let's see. So they have Rec 2100 HLG. So let's go with that. It's pretty good. But it does appear this. I think people have talked about this in Final Cut happening to them. So this is one of two examples here. We could definitely, if this is going to be our last transform, we could definitely activate luminance mapping and saturation mapping as well. And now we have an image that's under control. Let's hide everything before, after. So this is basically just a straight up conversion now. And you can see with HLG, you don't really need to worry too much about, like, it doesn't go from completely undersaturated to completely oversaturated. The saturation actually doesn't change that much. But if we look at our vector scope before, look at where the colors are positioned to now. So there's definitely a color space improvement there. And now we could probably just come in here. And if you wanted to fiddle with your curve, you know, I don't know, whatever you wanted to do here, but make some kind of finished image. I'd say that's pretty good. Comparing the colors, I don't know if the transform is going to work the same. Where was this was our, we'll do a one stop over on this one for this. No, that doesn't make any sense. Sorry. I'm making this up as I go along, which is important, I think, because when you actually work on things, sometimes you have a recipe to follow. Other times you kind of got to figure out what is going to work best for the project. So here is the one if we used slog3, and we can kind of just use this to compare and see if we're getting, you know, similar colors. We're getting a lot more contrast out of the HLG. So let's just go a little crazy with the contrast here just to try and see where the colors are falling. So the red went a little haywire on us here. You can see the red is like way up here. But other than that, it's pretty good. So I would say that this workflow that I just kind of made up for HLG, I would stand by it in terms of getting you a decent starting position. So that was just color space transform from Rec 2020 and Rec 2100 HLG for the gamma to the 2.41 here. Now I don't know if you can do that in LUTCalc. Let's take a look and see what they've got. Do they have any? So they got Rec 2100 HLG in the gamma, and they got Rec 2020. So should we see what kind of result this one produces? Let's go for it. So let's auto title this, generate a LUT, and where was I saving these things? I don't remember. Let's save it on the desktop. Let's see what kind of result we get out of that one. What I'll do is I'll make a copy of this clip, and we'll reset this one. So we have the one that we just made, and then we'll drop this LUTCalc one on here and see how close of a result it gets. So there, we'll put it in the LUTCalc folder so we know where it came from. Refresh. Okay, let's drop that on here. So definitely a different, what do we have here? We have a curve on. Get rid of that. Okay. So they definitely don't go about the result exactly the same. If we disabled luminance mapping on this one, yeah, there's definitely a different result. I definitely like the color space transform result a lot better. Let's see though if we can work with this one to make it work. So here's the issue, is that if we use LUTCalc, like I said, we're not going to have the same ability. We have some because nothing's clipped. So we're not in terrible shape here. Getting a little bit moody here. Okay. I don't really like what's happened up in there in the highlights, but we still have a similar, it's very intense. It's kind of like just like once we bring the curve into shape there, we get pretty similar color transformation, just a bit more intense. So I would say you can definitely work this one in, but you're gonna have to reel it back in a little bit. But yeah, LUTCalc will work for that as well. So that would be an HLG like manual workflow. But this color space transform I was really happy with. I just threw a curve on it, and it's punchy, probably a bit too punchy. And I think that I definitely. Oh, wait a minute, I didn't enable this stuff back. So again, we can put the mapping back on. Yeah, there. I think that's a nice image. Yeah, you could export that, I suppose, too, if you wanted, and then put it in your stomach. I haven't eaten yet today. You can export that and put it in your stomach, because with export these LUTs and eat them. You can export that and then put it in your monitor, and then it might give you a better indication if your intention is to grade this to Rec 709 and not use it for HDR. Then I think that would work. Now, if we did the exact same thing, but we applied it to the one-stop up one, then... Oh, that's not the one-stop up one. That's the duplicate of that. This is the one-stop up one. It's going to be... What did I just do? I just appended it. Not used to working on the laptop for this. There we go. Okay, so we're overexposed, right? So we can either make this curve a lot more corrective than the other one was, which is going to... I use curves a lot, but maybe I should use different tools for the sake of showcasing this. So we're definitely not getting the same... Our middle gray is a bit high on this. Let's bring this down. Just trying to get it like close enough. We're definitely contrastier, which again always happens when if you overexpose and then bring it down, generally you get a contrastier image. I shouldn't spend too much time on this. Yeah, that's not working for me. Let's Ooh, don't you hate it when it does that? That's something, I don't know if it's like based on the way that I move the wheel, but I find that if I move it just a little bit, then all of a sudden it jumps, and it like, I just tried to do it and I couldn't do it, but anyway, I'm sure this is boring. Is this, what's the camera conspiracy thing? Is this good content? I'm just trying to get it, I hate, I don't like matching things like this, but I'm just trying to get it, okay, that's reasonable enough for me to showcase my next point. What's this one about? Exposure and white balance / tint, primary correction before Rec 709 conversion. Correct, always. That was Dennis saying that you should do your exposure corrections before you do primary corrections. But what I'm trying to show here, the reason why I didn't do it that way is I demonstrated before, like I would come in here and I would make sort of like a correction curve and then apply the transform. But if we're trying to argue that potentially transforms only work to their desired intent if you're not affecting the image beforehand, then it's easier if we do it afterwards like this, so that we can see, so that we know that the transform went in correctly into both of them. But we'll do both actually, just for the sake of talking about this, because it's not a bad point. So this one and then this one, we will reset this and we'll just do like I demonstrated doing it with a curve before. And we can also do it with offset. So what does this one got? This one has like a little S-curve at the end of it. If we took that one away, then we'll have a better indication of how to make these two look similar. Okay, so I went a little bit ham with... Okay, so this would be one where we applied, like I said, sort of an anti-correction curve beforehand, and then this is one where it's just, so this clip here is 0 EV, this one is overexposed and brought down ahead of time, and that's the one that I showed you before where you'll have less noise in this version. So there's, let me zoom in a bit more for you, there's that, and then this is that one. Obviously much noisier than the one where we bring it down and then apply the transform. But the reason why I was trying to demonstrate this point here was to suggest that if you have a clip that you had a LUT, I guess I'm not using a LUT, I'm using a transform, but if we had it and our footage had a LUT applied, maybe we'd monitor that way and it came out too hot and you brought it down afterwards, what results would you get? Well, you'd get a punchier image automatically, and you'd obviously have a greater risk of that thing I was talking about, how you have more information being able to pull it down. Well, you're going to have less information to pull down from, but you still get the advantages of less noise. Obviously, there's like, it's hard to see the noise at all in this one because it's been pushed way down, and that's due to that punchiness. I feel like we might be getting a little bit off topic and abstract here because I'm just kind of experimenting now at this point, because I haven't ever really done this many different variants for HLG. I just have sort of like one method of working with HLG, but I thought I would play with it while we were in here and do it live. So for me, I probably wouldn't take this approach. I'd go back to the one that, like I said, can be contentious, but it's where if this is neutral exposure and I have one that's overexposed, I'll put a node first, and if this is Premiere, you could use your top sliders like exposure or whatever, and then in the creative panel you could add a LUT. But if you find that creates a weird result, you could actually add a second Lumetri color panel and add the LUT to the basic on the top of that second one, and the first one just be for your exposure corrections and white balance and whatever else, sure. So I didn't get it perfect, but I'm also not trying to spend any more time finessing curves on a live stream. But this would be that same example I showed with S-Log, where yes, the colors, you can even see it if you look, HLG is more friendly for this than, I'm looking at where the luminances of the colors here, and HLG being corrected with this reverse curve thing has less of an impact than log. It seems log has more of a shift to it. So it's HLG's friendlier in post for sure. But if we look at our vector scope, yeah, the shift wasn't that bad. Look at where the dots are before and after. So more manageable. This is something you could clean up easily. That was a question that people asked me. I have a whole video on it, but you could clean this one up easily if you wanted to by, say, this third node here. We could jump into the HSL curves and, you know, what's one example? Let's fix the green. So, well, actually, none of them are that bad, to be honest with you. It's actually tolerable. But you'll notice that the green is less saturated on this one. So we could, like, line it up maybe a little bit. This is hue. So this is changing the way it swings, like its hue. And then we jump over to saturation. And we could just increase the saturation a little bit, try to get in a similar position. And then you see how this one has sort of like an overall luminance. If it was just your colors that were like that, you could decrease the luminance of the colors, as you can see here. But if it's that your curve is incorrect and that's what's causing the issue, then you would have to go to this one. And yeah, to me it just looks like we need to shift this like that. So then we'll have a much closer image. Might be a depth of field difference there. But yeah, I mean, based on me just doing this now live, I would say that HLG is much more forgiving for throwing one of these reverse overexposure curves on at the beginning. And all we did here was correct the green, so we can get rid of that. And then, yeah, you could go and make final touches on that. But yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's everything I wanted to talk about. I'm at the sort of rambly point now. So let me jump over here and see if there's any, like, sort of pressing questions. But we'll look at wrapping it up here because I want to keep this, like I said, somewhat palatable for people after the fact. I'll try to go in and make timestamps, like table of contents. Let me switch to me. I'll try to go in and make like table of contents timestamps things for people watching this after the fact so they can jump around. Although it's mostly kind of like all interconnected. I don't know. Super chat here from Katori Crunch that says, follow up to raw question, will there be any appreciable difference to using log with a rec LUT versus just transforming it to rec 79 space in camera raw? Yeah, I suppose that would just be based on the intent of who made what. So because not everything is uniform, the answer is always yes. As you saw, even doing LUT calc versus the color space transform, or using ACES versus the color space transform, the same thing, you get different results. And that's, I assume that's just based on who's making them, you know? So the results won't be the same, but the point is that you're getting yourself to the correct, you're in the correct space where now you can make corrections that are all fine and easier and make it look however you want, make it look good to you, unless, you know, you're being paid by somebody who requires it to be a specific way. I wouldn't worry too much. Unless you're shooting, let's make sure I read this right. Log with a rec LUT. So if you're baking the LUT in, though, that's a different story. Because then again, you have that destructive aspect where now everything is what it is. So log and like baking in a LUT versus transforming it in post, it's a huge benefit to transform in post. But if in post you're just bringing raw in and you're saying, should I raw develop it to a certain way or raw develop it to log and then put it out to the other one? If you raw develop it to rec 709 and you're happy with the way it looks and it's done, well, then there's nothing to worry about in terms of like lossiness or whatever. But if you're raw developing it to rec 709 and then playing with it, that is less, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get that fly. That is less a worse way to do it than raw developing it to log and then doing all your whatever this is, corrections that you want to do. But if your workflow is literally just applying one Rec 709 LUT, then look at the raw development. If it looks the same, then just go with it, because why add work if you don't need to? But yeah, it really just comes down to if you're doing more stuff or not. Okay, I think we're all cut up on, can you do this on BRAW real quick? Do I have? Yeah, I could. Give me a sec. I think I probably just have like a BRAW clip on my drive. Give me 1 second. Okay. Whatever like my last video was. Hopefully it's not me running around naked. I'm sure is on here. We should be able to just pull it up right off the drive. I'll do that with my own little privacy here first before showing you guys. What is this a clip of? It's me with bedhead holding up a chart. Good enough. Okay, let me jump over to this. How are we doing in OBS anyway? For people that are curious about this whole laptop operation, we have 0 drop frames this entire time. What's the performance like? And we're not even using our resources that much. There's the beauty of NVENC. Okay, on to resolve. So we'll just bring this clip down into tests here, and we'll throw it on the timeline over here. And so yeah, just me. I've got both charts. I'm holding up a X-ray chart and then the DSC Labs chart. So let's go with the X-ray chart. Let me get a good shot of me holding it. Cool. So I'll just press Q there. That way, if we click on the color panel, it'll start at that exact frame. So let's go to the raw panel. So I'll show you a couple. Are we still good? We can see everything. My thing's in a good position. Everything looks fine. Okay. So I was talking about, I can actually demonstrate this now, that if you have your abilities here right now, obviously Blackmagic Design and Blackmagic Film, that's basically converting to log, if you will. But you'll notice that now there's Canon Log 2, Vlog. I don't know when these were added, but so we could actually like choose Vlog and we could choose Vgamut. And now we're basically in Panasonic land. And then we could go over to Panasonic Vlog to 709 and we could correct that way. Kind of wild, right? That's not the way I would do it though. So it's not the way I do it, is what I mean. I guess I should say. So Blackmagic Design Film. And then, yeah, you can change the ISO. Let's put this back on waveform. Okay. So this is an image that's overexposed, because that's what I do often in here to keep the noise somewhat controlled. Overexposed by, like if you were to apply, you know, like a LUT or whatever. So we'll go, so this is the raw panel. I mean, you can change your color, temperature, tint, exposure. You can adjust some aspects in here, you know, whatever you want. Put on highlight recovery, which will help a little bit with bringing the punchiness back to that light there. And then we could apply a LUT in here, but we can also do a similar thing. I imagine, like, I don't think that they're very good, but I imagine we could even do the same color space transform maneuver if we wanted to in here. So what do we have up to here? Gen 4. So Pocket 4K, Gen 4 film, sure. And Blackmagic Design 4K film. Is that what we're shooting in here? Blackmagic Design 4K film? Or is it Blackmagic Design film? That doesn't look right. Blackmagic Pocket 4K film Gen 4. That seems more correct. Okay, so there, as you can see, I am overexposed because I shot overexposed. So we could do that whole pulling down the curve thing here. I never do this, by the way. this workflow. I'm trying to, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't do color space transforms and stuff like that in Resolve for Blackmagic while shooting Blackmagic, because why would you when you can just use the raw developer? But I just thought we'd give it a try for fun. And then you could apply LUTs on here. I've often talked about Leeming LUTs in the past, if you want like a overexposed image that you can apply like noise reduction to, so you could use this one for instance. If you're overexposed, the gentleman Dennis that I was talking to, I think he makes a Pocket 4K LUT. I think we've talked about it before. I know we talked about the Panasonic ones, but so you could apply LUTs on there. We could do something where we convert it to something first, which could be what we would use. So yeah, we talked about that already. So I guess your question would be whether doing a color space transformer in here. This would be a demonstration of that. So if we went Canon Cinema Gamut and C-Log 2, I have the Canon Cinema Gamut, the C-Log 2 LUT, so we could pop that on. These are just different, I don't know. Really, if you get an image you like, you're good to go. I don't know what I'm showing you here exactly. I'm just demonstrating some workflow ideas. So I just sort of bring that curve down a little bit. So there's a decent something we did in a couple steps. So because I'm overexposed a little bit, I corrected the overexposure. We raw developed to Canon Cinema Gamut and Canon Log 2, and then we applied the official, this is from Canon themselves. I think I got this one for the C500 Mark II, but they're all the same. You can apply to C300 Mark III, whatever. Canon Cinema Gamut, Canon Log 2 to BT709 wide dynamic range. Now let's see what that looks like. That's a reasonably nice image. It does sort of have a little bit of that Canon, you know, I don't know, pinky glow in the skin tones, but that's a pretty nice image. We can take a look at the vector scope and see what we're working with here. Now I'm going to do something. I don't want to hear about how you can make a little window on it. I don't want to hear about it because it doesn't give you the same result. So I'm going to do this, which is a weird way to do it. But I'm just going to zoom in on the chart this way so that I can see these things a lot more clear. If you do a window, it's still small. So anyway, yeah, that actually looks quite a bit like Canon, the way this looks. If we cut ahead in the frame, we can actually see the difference between an X-Rite chart and a DSC Labs chart. So let's put a cut. What am I doing here? Get the reflectance down. Okay, that seems reasonable. Let's put a cut here, and we'll zoom out on this clip to get the whole chart in the frame. Okay, so now we've got X-Rite, DSC Labs. So you can see how some of the things are the same, like reasonably close, but do you see how it almost might even give you an idea too of when the manufacturers made the LUTs, who their supplier or like what kind of like chips they were using at the time, because you can see that this one does not seem to be optimized for the Cameline chart, but it does seem to be pretty good for the X-Rite. But if we say use Paul Leeming's LUT for comparison, so let's just put this back to camera metadata. So it was how I shot it. And then we'll put on Paul Leeming's Blackmagic 4K LUT. And then we switch back and forth. That still looks weird. Why does it look weird? I'll take back what I said. Maybe I don't have the correct... Because I know that Paul Leeming uses Cameline, so... Hang on. That's very interesting. I'm obviously missing something in here. Oh, right. This one, the one that I'm comparing to here, I have that curve put in the beginning of it. So I'm jumping back and forth. It goes, again, you can see color shifts. If you overexpose an image and bring it down, you're then going to have to tweak the colors afterwards. That's what the difference is. I've had shots in the past where normally the difference I can demonstrate for you if you want to know like what the real difference is. I think actually I might have an image. I don't know if this is like right to share or not. I've got a good example of this for people that were curious. I'm just going to access something on my computer, so I want to share it. I have to go over the network. Paul Leeming, in his generosity, supplied me with an image that was an X-Rite pocket video color checker, whatever those things are called. Let me just find this here. Sitting on top of, he's got a giant like Chroma Demand chart or whatever. Again, if you're gonna make LUTs, then it's a good investment. Sorry, where is this located? Yes, okay. Let me put that on my desktop and make sure there's no naked people in it. There are not. Okay, this way we don't have to jump back and forth to two different shots. So I'll switch back to this now. This could be useful for people who just want to know about charts. So let's bring that in. It is on my desktop here. and we'll add that. So there's an image. There's an X-Rite Pocket, X-Rite Video Color Checker Passport. That's what I'm trying to say. And then this is a, probably, what is that, like, I don't know what they're all Cameline, but one's called like Chroma du Monde and one's called something else. But this one's got a lot of little color chips on it, and then the big cross type in there. So we could evaluate the difference between the two. We'd have to isolate them though. So we'd have to take this one and let's make, whoa, click on the wrong clip. Let's make this one just the X-Rite. And then for this one, we will exclude the X-Rite from the shot. Okay. So now we can switch back and forth. Boom, boom. So you can see if you get all these little color chips, you can actually make this perfect little, what is this? Like sort of oblong hexagon or whatever. So that's makes your life really easy if you're trying to like make LUTs. And you can see, I guess, like how dialed in Paul Leeming tries with his color accuracy. And let's switch to the X-Rite. It's not bad. You know, you guys were asking like, what about the Passport? The Passport's fine. I have the Passport. I use it all the time. It's a handy little tool to have, and it's much more affordable, much more pocketable than, you know, carrying around one of these massive things. But if we look at the Vectorscope big style, let's make sure I'm not blocking it with my stupid face either. So we can see if say we go, this is the best you can get, the best result. You know, everything's dialed in perfectly, and we switch over to this one, it would look like our red is just a little bit over on the magenta side, and our yellow's a little bit on the green side, our green's a little bit cyan. It almost has like a little bit like a hue rock to it, and our skin tones are just a little bit, maybe a little bit too yellow, but it's definitely usable. I would say, if anything, based on this, we could do a hue, maybe just correct it a little bit that way. No, yeah, you can't see, because if you brought it up this way, then you'd have to pull the bottom to it. So but either way we turn it, it's not bad. It's pretty good. So rest assured, if you only have an X-Rite, I shouldn't say only, because they're still good devices, still a couple $100. But if you only have the X-Rite Passport Video, you're still in good shape. But most importantly, what you need out of that is this middle gray. That'd be the most important part. To have one of those, pretend this is middle gray. Just, you know, if you're out and you're out in sunlight, you can just like hold it and be like, okay, that's 41% from SLR3, cool. And then now you're in much better shape. And then also, you know, if you're overexposing versus underexposing versus whatever, because then if you consciously made that 40%, you go, let's go 2/3 up or one full stop up. Now I'm about to stop over. So that's probably the more important aspect of it. But that was pretty compelling, I think. Like, if you're going to make LUTs, that 11-step cross thing and all the little hexagonal colors are really, really handy. But the Passport Color Checker Video isn't terrible. I've heard that there might be some consistency issues though, so necessarily like my Passport Video might not be as good as another one, or, you know, but those tolerances, I guess, are what you're getting when you save money, maybe, or like, sorry, you're getting smaller tolerances by paying more money, I suppose. Anyway, what do you think? I think that's enough chatting about all this stuff. We're an hour and a half now. I should cut this off. I wanted people to be able to watch this after the fact. You forgot to add luminescence mapping and CST. That's why I looked overexposed. Exactly. I hope that, you know, if you made it this far, that you can take all the little things and assemble them and add them to your knowledge and then have a better understanding of it. Obviously, when you're doing this stuff live and I'm playing around with 9 different clips and trying to like present it and stuff like that, there's going to be like little mistakes. It's good to go through, get your workflow down, make sure you check everything. Don't leave little things out, like not remapping your Luma values or even your gamut. But yeah, I mean, if we did a quick little recap here, I would say that LUTCalc is a viable option for people who don't have the color space transforms. That if you do have color space transforms, it's a quick and easy workflow, in my opinion, and it's non-destructive, so you can put things before and after, and weird things that you did before, you can kind of undo them a little bit after if you wanted to, if you're worried about that. You can still generate LUTs, or you can now, if maybe you couldn't before, generate LUTs in Resolve from color space transforms, so you could then load them into your monitors and be able to see the result that way and shoot for the transform that you're going to do. Overexposure is fixable with just sort of like one of those reverse curves. It does remap your colors a little bit, change your luminance a little bit, and you'll have to tweak it, but that's only if you're trying to match color for color or shot for shot. If you're just trying to, or to a chart, I mean, if you're just trying to make a nice image, then you can shoot over, pull it down with that type of curve, you bury some noise, and nobody's going to necessarily know that, hey, that transform doesn't look exactly like that when you shoot like that with that other one. You must have, you know, changed your values before applying the transform. Nobody's going to care about that. They just care about the finished image, unless your specific job, or maybe like VFX workflow or ACES workflow or whatever, requires you to follow specific guidelines. Then that's the exception to the rule. But I'd like to think that if that's where you are, that you already have a good understanding of all of this. So you're, you know, beyond that, you're in a job as a colorist and you're following the specs of whatever your job requires. Or if you're really advanced, you're setting the new trends and you're making these things that I'm playing with right now. But yeah, hopefully that that was helpful. You know, I'm just trying to put this out there kind of like for free, so that whatever, you know, information is valuable, to hopefully that people can take something from it and improve their color work at all. And I want to do this as a live stream so we could try to interact a little bit. Normally I like to edit my videos down, but I thought that maybe this would, and it's worked. Some of you sent me messages and stuff like that, so it was good. We were able to handle some questions on the fly. It was fun. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. And it's been a lot of fun. And the next video I think we're looking at is probably going to be... Yeah, I think the next time you're going to see me, I should hopefully have a new Studios Undone studio tour for you. So yeah, looking forward to that. And then probably like a camera review or something after that. So stick around, make sure you subscribe if you're not, and I will see you soon. Have a good weekend, everybody.